This research focuses on digital intimacy within virtual house museums through speculative thinking that incorporates augmented and virtual reality. I explore in depth how the notion of intimacy shifts during the translation from physical to digital spaces, and how these changes can inform the design of cultural exhibitions in virtual environments. At the heart of my research is the concept of intimacy. Intimacy is a highly nuanced and subtle feeling, one that often resists definitive explanation due to the limitations of language. Across a wide range of studies on intimacy, there is no single agreed upon definition. It can be broadly understood as closeness, proximity, interconnection, and emotional resonance. In The Transformation of Intimacy, Anthony Giddens describes intimacy as a journey of self-discovery triggered by love, both painful and healing. It is exclusive and jealous, special and romantic. In his view, intimacy is democratic, bridging the gap between the small and the vast. I situate this idea alongside Susan Stewart's concept of the miniature and the gigantic from On Longing, where intimacy can be seen as a key mechanism within digital democracy. Rather than limiting my investigation to conventional relationships or sexuality, I approach intimacy as a feeling closely tied to self-awareness. In Jacques Lacan's theory of subjectivity, the self is continuously shaped through misrecognition. If a mirror reflects our external appearance, then intimacy, I argue, is what reflects our internal emotional reality, shaped and revealed through every encounter and effective interaction with the world. To establish a working model of intimacy, I draw on Miller's Intimate Relationships, where he offers a detailed exploration of the concept. While many frameworks focus on mutual understanding and shared emotional experience, what I find most compelling is, depending on Miller's intimacy framework, then more attention to the more subjective, even one-sided dimension of intimacy. How individuals emotionally invest in someone or something they feel close to, regardless of reciprocity. Reading on theories from other disciplines, I began to understand intimacy as something that can evoke a sense of authenticity, something close to everyday life. I experimented with various terms to describe this quality: a sense of belonging, self, narrative, body practice, and lived experience. Eventually, I've come to see trust as the most central trust that arises from intimacy, and that in turn deepens that intimacy. I identified the most appropriate context for my research: the home. The home is where people tend to relax and reveal their truest selves, or perhaps perform their most authentic identities. While the home doesn't necessarily imply comfort, it is a space where one's outward behavior often reflects something more genuine. As Gaston Bachelard commented, the house is like a shell, embracing the soft flesh within, and also protects the dreamer. At the same time, the meaning of the home is constantly shaped and reshaped by the subjectivity of those who live in it. Based on this, I define intimacy as a form of trust that emerges through everyday interaction, where objects gain ontological meaning through emotional resonance, becoming vessels for memory and affirmations of individual existence. My research is primarily grounded in digital media, but it also draws upon critical ideas from museum studies, collecting practices, spatial theory, material culture, and the study of intimacy. I engage closely with Gaston Bachelard's theories of space, particularly his view of how subjectivity unfolds and extends within spatial experience. Susan Stewart's work on nostalgia, the tension between the collective and the personal, and the aesthetics of the miniature also deeply informs my thinking. I also draw from Gaynor Kavanagh's reflections on memory and dreaming in the museum context, as well as Walter Benjamin's theory of the aura. In the age of mechanical reproduction, particularly his contributions to thinking about narrative and the effective power of objects and images. In this research, I developed a methodological framework that began with autoethnography. In other words, my own perspective as both a visitor to house museums and a researcher. Using immersive tools such as head-mounted displays, panoramic photography, and 3D scanning, I capture not just the physical features of a space, but also its atmosphere. These technologies are not used merely to replicate space, but to locate emotional touchpoints details that might trigger memory and feeling within virtual environments. From there, I embed these personal experiences within broader material culture, sociological, and design-based contexts. Through spatial analysis, semi-structured interviews, and memory mapping, I identify patterns of spatial arrangement and object placement that are closely tied to bodily perception and emotional resonance. In addition, I use speculative design to imagine new modes of interaction and narrative within virtual spaces, ones that don't simply reproduce reality, but instead create future-oriented experiences of digital intimacy. In addition, I use speculative design to imagine new modes of interaction. Finally, on a theoretical level, I draw on phenomenology and epistemology to explore how emotional connections are formed within virtual environments. Specifically, I ask, when we feel a sense of familiarity or belonging in a digital reconstruction of a historic home, how is that feeling co-produced through the body, memory, materiality, and culture? This whole methodology is both a reconstruction of space and a reactivation of intimacy. By conducting 3 case studies of different house museums, my discussion combined digital museum experiences with approaches informed by speculative design. Through this comparison, I aim to engage with digital museums in a more future-facing and critically reflective way, ultimately contributing to a deeper understanding of what the virtual museum could become. A more implicit question underlying my research is this: if humans were no longer present, how might these objects continue to exist in ways that still feel emotionally resonant? After all, their lifespans often exceed our own. But what if we take this further, not simply imagining objects outliving us, but recognizing that they have already become extensions of us? In today's world, external objects have increasingly become integrated into the human body, not only physically, as in the case of wearables or implanted technologies, but also emotionally and cognitively. The boundary between internal and external is no longer stable. Our phones, for example, have shrunk over time, growing more intimate, more personalized, and more embedded in our daily gestures and routines. They are no longer just tools, but prosthetics of memory, emotion, and social presence. In this context, speculative design offers a vital framework for rethinking how we might interact with objects, spaces, and information in the future, not as distant or detached entities, but as deeply intertwined parts of ourselves. This is more obvious with objects like the phone. If we imagine a future shaped by increasingly intimate interfaces, then exploring how material objects can continue to carry our presence, communicate our intentions, and sustain memory becomes not just interesting, but urgent. Susan Stewart writes on longing that nostalgia is a sadness without an object, a sadness which creates a longing that of necessity is inauthentic, because it does not take part in lived experience. This idea is particularly relevant to how we engage with house museums. For instance, Miss Toward, a Glasgow woman who lived from the late 19th to the mid-20th century. She worked as a shorthand typist and lived in the same tenement flat for more than 50 years, maintained her apartment with great care and meticulous attention, reflecting the belief that a house only truly becomes a home through ongoing care and emotional investment. From a theoretical perspective, I draw on Latour's actor network theory, which recognizes objects as agents, active participants in social interactions through their entanglement with human lives. Alfred Gell's concept of the surrogate reason of matter, from Art and Agency 1998, also informs my thinking. Gell argues that objects hold surrogate properties, which can profoundly influence human behavior. These theories help me understand how material things in a house museum can carry emotional weight and act as mediators of memory, even across digital translations. So back to the beginning, what is digital intimacy? How do we use it? And how might it function as a key emotional element within exhibition design? Rather than thinking of intimacy as something lost in the digital shift, I suggest we consider how it might be reconfigured, how traces of memory, subjectivity, and embodiment can still find a place within the digital realm, not despite its immateriality, but because of its capacity for poetic and effective reconstruction. Scholars such as Lauren Gale Berlant, Shaka McLaughlin, Nathan Rambukkana, and so on have offered critical perspectives on digital intimacy, highlighting issues such as the commodification of relationships, platform control, the exploitation of emotional labor, questions of authenticity, and tensions between embodiment and digital space. My research responds to these concerns by shifting the focus away from polished, performative forms of intimacy often found on mainstream social platforms. Instead, I center on emotional resonance and residual traces moments that are incomplete, fragmented, silent, or marked by absence. This includes the brokenness and digital imperfections found in virtual representations of historic homes and objects. I explore what I call a non-performative intimacy, one that resists the platform-driven demands for visibility and interactivity, and instead allows for private, personal forms of emotional exploration. Eventually, I define digital intimacy in virtual museums as the emotionally resonant and personally engaging interaction between individuals and digitized cultural environments. It arises through meaningful collaboration with virtual objects and media, the hypersensitive rendering of material textures, metaphorical links to personal experience, and the creation of private spaces for imaginative expression. Rather than simply replicating the physical, digital intimacy enables an embodied, effective relationship with cultural content, one that is dynamic, interpretive, and deeply subjective. In this way, the virtual becomes not a lesser substitute, but a meaningful space for rethinking how we connect with memory, materiality, and meaning. Thank you for hearing until here. I am expect to discuss further with you. If you have any interested or question, please contact me by following contact information.